Some of the behaviors that we witness when placing objects like walls and other elements in Revit are driven by their instance properties. In other words, the property applies to each and every instance you place. Other properties are determined by the type properties of the objects. Types are collections of settings that are shared in common by an entire group of like objects, in this case, in a group of walls. If you change a type parameter, that change will apply to all instances of that wall throughout the project. So if you change an instance parameter, it only applies to the actual object you have selected. So in this movie here, I'm going to look at both some type and some instance properties with respect to walls, and I've got a simple data set up on screen in order to illustrate these points. The file is called Wall Properties, and you can find it in the Chapter 4 exercise files. And I'm in a view right now called Location Lines. The location line, which we talked about in the Adding Walls movie, there we looked at Finish Face Exterior and Finish Face Interior, and we also looked at Wall Centerline. And when we talked about that property, that was actually an instance property. So what that means is each wall could have its own location line setting. Now, before I go ahead and start changing any location line settings or any other settings, I just want to kind of finish discussing all of the various options that we have for location line. So if I select this wall and I look here at the choices under location line, there are actually 6 options. And so I've got them all illustrated here on screen. Finish Face Exterior, we already talked about. That's the outermost face of the exterior side of the wall. Finish Face Interior, outermost face of the interior side of the wall. Now to illustrate that, I've got a more complex wall here that has a CMU backup. That's the structural core of the wall. It's got an exterior face that includes rigid insulation and air gap and brick, and it's got an interior face that includes furring with a layer of drywall. So it becomes a little more clear which side is the interior, which side is the exterior. Now the wall center line is just simply the geometric center between the two faces of the wall. Now these other 3 points, core face exterior, core face interior, and core center line, are all with respect to just the core of the wall, the structural part of the wall, the part of the wall that's actually holding up the wall. So you can use any one of those 6 location lines when you draw your walls in your projects. Now, when you apply a location line, that's an instance-based property. So I'm going to switch over here to a view called Wall Types. And here we just have a simple floor plan view, which is a very simple diagram of just 4 walls. And what we're going to notice right away is there's a slight problem with the way these walls are laid out. So let's look at 2 instance properties with respect to these walls. Now, when I select any one of these 4 walls, they all have wall center line as their location line. I can change that location line of any of the walls to be any of the settings that I want, and each one of the settings can be different. So as you can see, I can go through here and I can make all of those 4 walls 4 different settings. So that's an instance-based parameter. It only affects the wall in question. Now, another example of an instance-based parameter is flipping the wall. In this case, you can see that the brick is all on the inside and the drywall is all on the outside, and that's just totally wrong. So if you click on a wall, you'll see this little flip grip, and we can click on that, and that actually flips the wall. Now, notice the effect that had. It actually flips around the 2 little round handles here, which indicate where the location line is. So as I flip each wall, you'll see that it will flip very differently depending on where I put that location line. So the 2 behaviors work in unison with one another, and it's important that you understand that. So that can be one of the indicators or one of the considerations that you have for where to place your location line. So those are instance-based parameters, and you want to keep those in mind when you're placing walls. What about type parameters? Well, let's look at the most basic type parameters. Let's compare these 2 walls. This wall looks different from this wall. What makes them look different? Well, this wall is one type. It's called Basic Wall Exterior Brick on CMU. And this is another type, generic 12 inches. It's very easy to change one to another by just simply choosing here off the properties palette and picking another type of wall. I can choose anything that I have off the list, and it will actually change the wall dramatically, and in some cases even show many more components. So if we make a change to that wall type, what will happen? Well, in this case, I have 4 walls that all share the same type. If I make a change to even one of them, that change will be impacted and reflected on all 4 walls. So let's take a look. The way you get to the type properties is to click the Edit Type button over here on the Properties palette. So you can select any one of the 4 walls. You do not have to select all 4. You click Edit Type, you'll get this dialog that comes up, and any change you make here is going to apply to all 4 walls in this case. So I could make them from exterior walls, I could change them to interior walls, I could change the core scale fill pattern, or I could even edit the structure. So let's do something pretty dramatic. Let's go ahead and edit the structure, and I'm going to remove several of the components. Before I do though, let's talk about this briefly. I've already outlined what the components of the wall were, and you can now see that here in this dialog. This is how you would actually modify and change those settings. So the core boundary is in gray. Anything within that core boundary is considered the core of the wall, and in this case that's the structural component, and it's CMU 7 5/8 inches. On the exterior side of the wall, indicated right here at the very top of the window, we have a membrane layer, we have our insulation, our air gap, and our brick. And then on the interior side of the wall at the bottom, we have our metal furring and our gypsum board. What would happen if we went in here and we decided we didn't want any kind of furring on the inside? So if I just simply delete those two components and click OK, what you're going to notice is when I click OK, that change applies across the board to all four walls, and not only the four that I have selected, but if I were to create a new wall with that same type, it would not have any furring as well. Okay, so that's a good example of a type-based parameter that applies across the board. Let's look at one more. If I edit this type, we have this really interesting setting here called Core Scale Fill Pattern. So what this allows me to do is to edit any fill pattern that I want, apply any kind of fill pattern. So I could put a cross-hatching or a solid fill even, and then I can change the color, and let's do a nice bright blue, and we'll click OK. And when I click OK out of here, it will look as though nothing has happened. Well, that setting only applies when coarse scale is assigned to the view. What does that mean? Down here at the bottom of the view, we actually have 3 levels of detail that can be applied to any view in a Revit project. We're currently looking at medium detail, and that's why we're seeing the brick and the block and the drywall and so forth. If I change this to coarse, it's going to change the view to only show the outline of the wall, and it will now display that bright blue infill color. And again, you can see that applies across the entire project to all walls of that type. So that gives you a little bit of a sense of what the difference is between instance-based parameters and type-based parameters. You're going to manipulate both of these regularly in your Revit projects, and it's a pretty good idea to understand the power and the flexibility of both types of settings.